Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome along to today's webinar. I'm Greg Barth, and I'll be your host for today's event. I can see from the list of people that are currently joined us is that there are a few people that have been on webinars before, and there are some that may not have been on a webinar before. So for those that have been with us before, if you can just bear with me for a short period of time just while I go through a bit of housekeeping for those that have not. So for those that have not, the technology we are using today is quite easy to use. In front of you, you'll see an image of the GoToWebinar floating control panel. When you join, it is fully expanded like you can see on the left-hand side of your screen. But the funny little thing, after a little bit of time, will reduce itself. Now, the reason for that being is that if you have one screen, you can clearly see the PowerPoint. If you have an extended desktop, you can move that control panel to the other screen, and you can expand it and leave it out and open by going up to View and untoggling Auto Hide. To listen to today's webinar, you can either use your computer mic and speakers, or you can use a telephone. If you do use your computer mic and speakers, or VoIP, we have had a few troubles in the past with it. However, you can change over to use the telephone at any point in time by opening up your audio panel on your floating control panel and choosing telephone and then dialing in. You will see that there is a 1-800 number, so it won't cost you any more. When you dial in, you can put in the access codes that you see in your control panel. Don't use the ones that you can see on the screen at the moment, because we all get our own personalised entry details. For the interaction today, there's a number of ways that you can interact with the presenter. You can interact by either raising your electronic hand, so you will see on the floating control panel a little electronic hand there, where you can click that, and as I am moderating the webinar for today, I can see that your hand has been raised, and at the appropriate time can unmute you, and you can ask a question. Alternatively, you can type a question into to the chat line, and I will receive that question. I will ask that question, but the person who submitted it will remain anonymous. So if you're a little bit scared about asking any questions, then there's the way that you can put it in. Good. Excellent. Wonderful. Okay, so you can all click the hand again, and that'll bring it back down. Thank you very much. Okay, so to get the most out of today's presentation, can I suggest that you turn off your emails and tune into what the presenter is saying? You can take some notes along the way and jot down questions as they come to mind, or alternatively, you can type them into the chat line. Today's presentation is being recorded, so afterwards I will arrange to get the recording up onto the FutureBeef website, and then you'll be able to watch the recording at your leisure once it's up there, and I'm sure Matt, our presenter, will let you know when it's there. So today we have Matt Brown from FutureBeef, who will be guiding you through the Grazing BMP, a voluntary benchmarking tool for producers and industry. Matt will be covering a number of topics today on how it came to be, the modules within the program, and the data collection and use. So ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Matt to our webinar. So Matt, it's over to you.
Thanks, Greg, and welcome everybody, and thanks a lot for taking the time to join into this webinar. This is my first webinar. I'm extremely nervous. I find it very bizarre talking to myself and people can actually listen, because I usually talk to myself and no one listens to me. So this is a bit of a novel concept. Today we're going to be talking about the Grazing BMP and how it came about and what we can use it for. It's meant to be an information sort of session, so staff within DAF understand what it's all about, and also external people outside of the Fitzroy Basin that haven't had much experience with it can understand what it's all about. There's 3 partners involved in this program, and that's FBA, the Fitzroy Basin Association, AgForce, and QDAF. the QDAF staff member that got this whole thing going on our end was Lindy Symes. She left in February this year. I started working in October last year, and she left in February this year. So I've been doing it since she left and Joanna Ganjami has just joined in August this year, and we work under Mick Sullivan. So that's the main staff on the QDAF side who's been handling the program. Greg mentioned it's a voluntary self-assessment program, and it's been designed as a vehicle to help producers to find ways of improving what they're doing on their property to make them more sustainable into the future. It's actually a sort of vehicle to look at what you're doing and link to incentive funding through NRM groups if you feel that that might be a prerogative into your business, and also benchmarking what you're doing. So it's about trying to find continual improvement in your business. How it came about was it was decided that the grazing industry was one of the only agricultural industries that didn't have a BMP system, and if we look around, you'll notice that horticulture has one, cotton has one, cane is developing one, and dairy has one. So it was decided that it was a good idea if the grazing industry adopted a BMP program. It actually came about through a group in Rolleston who had the original idea that the grazing industry should develop a BMP program. And it's, like we've said before, it's completely voluntary. It's about benchmarking what people are currently doing on their property, and then also it's a way of demonstrating to the wider community that producers are producing their animals in an ethical way and also in an environmentally sustainable way. It was developed in about 2009, and it was based on the highly successful Grazing BMP, which has the same 3 partners, and it's been rolled extensively out in the Fitzroy Basin as well. Initially, the project was to develop 3 modules, but it's since expanded to 5 modules, and I'll talk about those modules in a bit later on. To keep this relevant to primary producers, a producer reference group was formed, and that consisted of landholders that grew cattle in the Fitzroy Basin, and there's a guy from the Burdekin, and there was also another guy from Mundubbera who's moved back to Jambin now. So their role was to come up with the actual standards that are within the modules and the actual content of the modules. And we've done that to try and keep it as practical as possible for people on the land. They've been very involved throughout the whole process of developing these modules, and we met with them the other day just to go through the last module in development. So the actual modules in the program are soil health, grazing land management, animal production, animal health and welfare, and people and business. Originally there was another module in the program called property management and planning. We trialled that a few times, and we found that it wasn't working as well as what we hoped. So we've since decided to disintegrate that module and put it into the other existing modules. So in regards to the soil health and the grazing land management modules, they're the ones that are currently on the net, and they've been trialled extensively throughout the Fitzroy Basin. The animal production and the animal health and welfare modules are currently with our editor. They've gone through a number of drafts, and they're with an external editor. And the people and business module has been viewed by our producer reference group, and it'll go to the editor once we get those edits completed from the suggestions that they had. So I'll just briefly talk about how we formed the content of these modules. The producer reference group came up with the actual stuff that should be in it, and also they've come up with the standards as well. From there, we got external or internal experts in the field to write the actual module. For example, for the grazing land management module, Jane Pryor has written the majority of that, and the soil health stuff has been written by David Lawrence. Once we had the actual stuff written, we send it back to the producer reference group for their comments, and then it goes to an external editor, and then it gets piloted. So since I've been on board, the soil health and the grazing land management module have been through about 5 different drafts, and I can solemnly say that I believe that they're right to go. They've been written in a generic sort of form that they can be trialled anywhere in Australia. Last year, MLA were looking to come on board as a potential partner, and they were looking to take the whole program onto a national scale. So to do that, they organised a meeting in Melbourne where they called producers from all over Australia to come along to look at the actual content of the 2 modules and give us their feedback. And that included people that produced cattle and sheep from Tasmania, Victoria, the Territory, Western Australia and Northern Queensland. There was no one there from New South Wales, unfortunately. So these modules have had a lot of rigorous sort of scrutiny, and like I said before, they've been written that they can be used anywhere in Australia, but mainly we're focusing on Queensland, and the main purpose of them was to make sure it worked in the Fitzroy Basin. The animal production and the animal health and welfare haven't had so much rigour, and the people in business, because they've only just coming onto line. So we will endeavour to get them reviewed, and also as we go through the piloting process, any legitimate comments that are brought up by people, that participants within the workshop, and we think that things need to be changed, we'll change them to make them more practical. Because that's what the whole idea of this is that it's going to appeal to people that are growing cattle and sheep probably into the future, and to make it as practical as possible. So we've talked about how it works briefly, but it's a voluntary self-assessment, and people go into a workshop and they look at what they're doing and they rate what they're doing. They're actually able to develop action plans to improve their practices and to change from one standard to another if they want to. But the whole thing about the action plans is that it's a completely individually based sort of system, and it's got to be practical so people are going to use it. So we try and give some direction within the workshops on what should go into action plans, but in the end we've got to make it easier for the participants to make the action plans actually be actioned upon at a later date. Once the people are actually in the system, they can go in and change their profile at any time, change their answers, and this will become more prevalent and more easy to understand once we get into the website, which is a bit later on. Data safety was a big concern, and we were really conscious about how we're going to make it as safe as possible. The data is actually owned by AgForce, so they have the overall control of the data that goes into the system. The system is actually looked after by the same guy who looks after the cotton BMP and the grains BMP, and he's based in Toowoomba. It's on the same system as what the banking system is on, so it's as safe as we can get it. What happens is an individual who goes into the workshops, we create their own individual profile, and they are the only ones that can see what they enter into that, their particular profile. But in saying that, we are able to collect an anonymous dump of the percentage of people that have answered each particular standard. And the beauty of this data is that the 3 partners that are involved are able to use this data in a proactive way. For example, we could say to consumers that 90% of our producers are doing this sort of standard, and 80% of people are doing this. So it's a great tool that we can use for both environmental management, saying to the outside community that we're looking after the environment, and also one of the biggest issues that I feel is facing livestock production into the future and now is animal welfare. So we can use the standards that we've created and the actual data that we've collected to promote what we're doing, and we can have something to use as an argument against groups that might be saying bad things about agricultural production into the future. So it's pretty like, I find it pretty exciting that we've got this sort of tool available now for promotion. And I'd also like to point out that, as far as I know, this is one of the only, well, the only program in Australia where actual people involved with the industry have had a say in what goes into it from the very beginning. Like, the producer reference group have had a say of what should go into it, the questions that we ask, and the actual module content itself. So that's pretty exciting, because when we think of all the other stuff that's gone on in the past, a lot of it's been enforced on producers and they haven't had any say, where we've gone from the ground up, getting them involved from the very beginning to make it practical as possible and as usable as possible for people that are growing cattle and sheep probably into the future. January to June 2012, you'll notice that the green line is the indication of the people that were assessed themselves at the BMP standard. The blue is the above and the yellow is below. This stuff was sourced from all over the Fitzroy Basin. We've been to Calliope, Emerald a couple of times, Springshaw, Rollston, oh gosh, the list goes on, Claremont, Middlemount. So we've been all over the Fitzroy. We've also gone out to a couple of people's places as well. And yeah, it's been pretty exciting with the stuff that we're collecting. You'll notice that the property management and planning module was in there. That's because within that reporting period, we were doing those two actual modules, that actual module, but we've, like I mentioned before, we've since changed that module and we're putting it into the existing modules. I'll briefly talk about the soil health module because we've since changed the format for that, and we're digging a pit. And we're talking about the characteristics of the soil that's important to grass growth. And in our experience by doing these workshops, we found that a lot of primary, like cattle producers, realise that soil is important, but they don't understand the particular characteristics of the soil and the importance of that of growing grass, because their main concentration has been growing grass. So we've got two guys on board that have been around for a very long time. They've got an extensive knowledge of soils, and we're trying to make it as practical as possible. So we do the module, we talk about in more detail the characteristics of the soil that are important to grass growth, and then we go out into a property, dig a hole, and we talk about the soil profile and what we should do with it. And also do a couple of practical things such as a pH test and what that means to growing grass, and looking at this actual structure and whether or not it's actually sodic or not. So that's a new sort of thing that we've developed for the soil health, and it's going really well. I'm very excited. So we have actually changed the actual layout of the soil health to an actual day. So new participants coming in will be doing a whole soil day. The grazing land management, we initially ran that out at a few workshops, and FBA have taken that on board within the Fitzroy Basin, and they have developed a practical sort of component to that as well, which links directly to the stocktake course and the grazing land management edge course. With the animal production and the animal health and welfare modules, Joe Ganjami has come up with a new plan for that we'll be trialling in the new year, and also the people in business, Joe has taken the lead with that as well, and we'll be trialling a new format with those into the new year. So that's pretty exciting as well. We're hoping to get the whole package sorted out by March. So yeah, we've got some busy times ahead. For those of you that work for DAF, you're all well aware that we're about meeting, continually improving what we're doing and making sure that we're getting the, the best value for money for our projects. So M&E played a big part in this actual, program on how we were doing things. So to do that, we employed a company from Toowoomba who are M&E specialists, and we went through several versions of feedback sheets. And here's an example of one of the feedback questions that we came up with, and it just indicates the percentage of people of what they thought they got out of the actual program. So we're finding that to go pretty well. It's an actual database where we enter the feedback and then it generates some reports for us. So it's saving us a lot of time and we're finding it to be pretty efficient. So each individual module has its own feedback sheet that we're able to analyse. Here's an example of the areas that were covered from January to June 2012, and I briefly mentioned that we've been all over the Fitzroy Basin. This year we also looked at other areas outside the Fitzroy to see what they thought of it. We went to Mackay, Proserpine and Bowen. We've got to go back to Prosy because we could only get through one actual module, so we'll be going back in the new year to get their thoughts on the grazing land management module. You'll notice that there's three obviously columns in the actual table. The all participating businesses hectares indicates all businesses that did a module from that time period. That includes people who are already in the system. So you'll notice that the soil health has the same figure as the businesses new to the program. The businesses new to the program are people that have come into the program that have had no exposure to the program at all. So the soil health has the same figure for both of the columns because they're all new people. The GLM and the PMP consist of people that have already been within the system. The PMP people had already done the soils and the GLM module, and the GLM module people had already done the soils module. So that's why there's new businesses coming into those different columns. So into the future, we talked about we'll be piloting the animal modules and people and business extensively throughout the Fitzroy. We'll also be going into other catchments such as the Burdekin next year to trial the program there and pilot it to see how it goes up there. We need to look at reviewing the review process of people that are already within the system, within the Fitzroy, to get their prerogatives or get their experience on the whole program and to see if they're actually using it and how to make it more usable if they're not. And we'll be looking at alternative delivery methods such as webinars, which is pretty exciting as well because we might be able to get to more people that can't get to workshops. The best thing about the workshops in that is that it generates a lot of discussion within participants. It's mind-blowing the way that people have said to me, we've got so much by just coming to the actual workshops because it's reinforcing that we're doing the right thing and it's creating a lot of discussion about how we could change things into the future, but also it's just great to generate ideas. And to me, that's been one of the best benefits of the whole program is that we are generating that sort of discussion and people are being very comfortable to discuss with their neighbours and neighbours are taking on board what's being said. So that's been pretty exciting. Like I mentioned before, we're hoping to get the whole package ready, completely completed by March 2013. Whoops. Here's a few quotes that we've received from people that have gone into the system already. The photo is of a young couple that are located at Springshaw. They're a very dynamic couple, and it's been great to have their endorsement for the whole program. So that's been a very positive thing. They have embraced the program really well, and they think it's really good. So we've been really happy with that. This is the last slide in the actual slide presentation, and I thought I'd call for questions now about the presentation, and then we can go into the actual website itself, and I'll show you what it does, and we can finish up with more questions then.
All right. Thanks, Matt. That was really good. So, everyone, does anyone have a question to ask Matt on the presentation that he's given us so far? Okay. Marie, you're unmuted. You can ask Matt a question.
Oh, thanks, Greg and Matt. Just in passing, with the Animal Health and Welfare module, has there been a team or people identified who will help work up how that will be delivered? I suppose AgForce is quite interested in being involved in that kind of dynamic of how that would be delivered.
Yeah, hi Mari. No, not yet, but that's definitely something that we need to talk to you guys about into the future. I guess, as you're well aware, we've been trying to get all the iron, the wrinkles out of it, but it's something that we really need to work with you guys on how we're going to do the delivery. And I guess that's a steering group committee sort of discussion as well, Mari.
Okay, yeah, that might be something we work on as well as all the other tasks that we've still got to do.
Yeah,
amongst
the 2
I
million
think
others,
once that module's finalised,
that we're working on, yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be a key one that a fair few of our producers will want to get on board with. So we
yeah,
might be
absolutely.
ready to
and
roll
it's
with
great to have Ag Force's involvement because realistically it's a huge issue that's facing industry, and it's great to have Ag Force's endorsement and involvement in that to push it along.
Thanks.
Good day. Thanks, Murray. Alex, you're unmuted. You can ask Matt a question. You there, Alex? Hello, Alex? Alex, if you can hear me, you might want to type your question in because I can't hear you. Oh. Mari, do you have another question for Matt?
Sorry. Not at this stage. Yeah, I'm just wondering, Alex, whether he has microphones on his computer or, yeah.
Alex has used his computer system.
Okay.
I can see it at my end. I can see it at my end. He's VoIPed in.
Okay.
So yeah.
He might, need that little, I don't know. Anyhow, you can side guide him through that. He knows how to use a little question box.
Okay. I can hopefully shoot him a little question and he can get that back. So what we might do is, Matt, if you just want to continue on, and I will do some little bit of work in the background for you.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, everyone. So with the final part of the session, I just wanted to show you what the actual website can do and how people enter data into the system. I'll just briefly talk about how the workshops run. Prior to the workshop, we receive an attendance list, so we actually put people on the system before they come to the day, and that's the main thing. Is the main goal of that is to try and save time. So we get their details in regards to their name, email addresses, and so on, addresses, and we put it into the system beforehand. And that, like I said, the main thing is to try and save time. So when people come into the system, you'll notice that mouse is my triangle. You'll see that I'm logged in as Matt Brown at dd.queensland.gov.au. So that's what we use as we use their email as their actual login name. So this is the front page of the actual website, and we are in the process of deciding what we're going to do. The three partners are going to come up with a whole facelift for the website to make it more user-friendly and to make it run more efficiently. So we have been waiting to get all the suggestions sorted before we hit the poor guy, Dan Hickey, to do it, because it's a huge job. So, yeah, it's still, you'll notice that the property management and planning page is still there, but the main ones that are on are the grazing land management and soil health. And these are just a brief explanation of the module. So that, for example, that's the grazing land management module. So that's just a summary of what's in that system. So once people come into the system, we actually get them to check that we put their data in correctly, such as their names, business names, and stuff like that. So you'll notice that there's three tabs in this business section, and the first tab is the business information. And like I mentioned before, that is the stuff that we collect beforehand. This on this page here, we don't do any reporting for any of this. This is just completely up to the actual producers themselves. So it's of no relevance to us what goes in here. The next tab along is the property information. Now, this program has the ability to capture as many properties that the actual individual owns. So you'll notice that for the select property here where my mouse is, it says Brown Downs, and this is just a place that I made up. And you'll notice that there's another place underneath. So for example, if I held 5 properties, I could tell the person who organises the workshop, in this case me, that I've got a number of properties, and we're able to put those properties onto the system. The property name is just something that we get beforehand. The region is actually put in by the administrator who registers the property. The ownership from is a generic date, and so is the ownership to. We have no, it's no relevance to us, as in the 3 partners, in regards to when you bought the property or anything like that. Like, we don't report on anything in regards to the property ownership. But it's up to people. If they want to edit the property details, they can do so by clicking that button down below where my mouse is now. The next tab is when we start to collect what they do on their property, the areas of the property, which is highly important for us for reporting periods, and the land systems that are on their property. So to do that, we just go to this tab here under the property information where it says add new record, and we click on it, and it'll bring up a box. Now this box is general information about the property. So for example, usually in the property area information, we're actually going to change that description to say enterprise description instead of property area information. So we just usually tell people to put in what they do on their, in regards to their cattle enterprise. So for example, if I was breeding, I just type in breeding there. If you are backgrounding, you type in backgrounding. Whatever you do. If you fatten bullocks, you put in fattening enterprise. The next tab is the actual total property area. So that's your the entire place. So I'll just put an example in there, and you'll notice that if you don't know your hectares, you can type it into acres and it'll convert it either way for you. The next tab is the areas under grazing. So that's to cater for people that may be doing cropping on their property. So we don't want to record or collect data on areas that's not used for grazing. So that's why that tab's put in there. So for example, I could be using 1350 hectares for grazing. The last step in that process is just putting in the date that you enter it, which is the 12th. And then you just go insert. Once that information is in, people can go back and change it at any time if they so choose to. But we found that most people are pretty happy with it. The next thing we do is we collect the actual grazing system that they're using. Now there's a number of different systems that people are able to choose from, and they can be listed in this down arrow here. So if, for example, people were using 80% continuous grazing and 20% rotational grazing, they have to insert this twice. So I'll just do it, for example. So if I did 80% continuous to 12 and go insert, I need to do another record to get it to add to 100%. Come on, calendar. What are you doing? No, it won't. Anyway, it's done it now. It's done it. Great. So that's what we collect in that information. We're not reporting on that currently, but who's to say that into the future we may need to report on that. The next thing we do is we actually collect the land types that are on their property. And that's the same deal, where we get them to add up the percentage, guesstimate the percentage of the land types that are on their property. Into the future, we may be going to supply a map beforehand of the land types, but when we go into the Vertican, I've been told that Vertican producers predominantly have land type maps. So, but anyway, Joe's got onto us a tool on the internet where you can type in your lot and plan and it'll generate a land type map. So we can actually do that within the workshop as well. Currently, we've got the major land types for the Fitzroy and the Mackay with Sundays in there because those are the areas that we piloted. Into the future, we're going to set it up that you type in the area where you are and it'll bring up the predominant land types for that area. So you don't have to go scrolling through 600 entries trying to guess which land types best suits your property. And like I mentioned before, it has to add up to the percentages have to add up to 100%. So for example, if they had 80% alluvial, they'd do one insert and then they'd have to do another record to make it up to, you know, if they had 20% bluegrass downs to get it up to 100%. So once this information is in, people can go and change it any time they want, but we only do this on the first time that they register. So we don't change this every time they come into a different module. Once it's in, they have the ability to change it if they so choose to, or they leave it as they want. I mentioned before that it has the ability to do a number of properties. If they do have a number of properties, they need to do that whole system for each one because it won't automatically capture both properties. So if they have two properties or three properties, they need to do that. They need to do that process for each individual property. So once we get that stuff in, we then go to the modules. So here's an example of what the module assessment looks like on the computer. I'll briefly talk about these toolbar up here. So the assessment date is something that we give them, like we tell them to generate the particular date and the location of the assessment. The module toolbar enables you to go between the three modules that are on the net. The Grazing Land Management module is going to come off in the new year. The Soil Health and the Grazing Land Management, the Property Management and Planning module, is the one that's going to come off. The other two will stay, and the two animal modules and the People and Business module will be added. So you're able to negotiate or navigate between any of those particular modules. The next area is the key areas within the module. So within the Grazing Land Management module, these are the key areas that are located within there. And you're able to navigate between those as well. So we're currently looking at the Grazing Land Management module, and we're looking at the land capability and condition key area. And we can do that by looking at these three tabs here. So the first tab is the key area information, and this is the blurb about all the the blurb that describes the standards that people are assessing themselves against. So you'll notice that there's titles and there's examples of land in good condition, B condition, and so on. This is being set up so if people have trouble actually answering the standard, they're able to go back to that information to try and get the information to answer it. This is all based on, this is stuff that Jane Pryor written, and it's based on the stock take and the GLM information, and it works closely with the rolling ball. model. And actually a great development out of the whole all over the country who hadn't seen it before, and people within Victoria who hadn't seen it before, and Tasmania thought it was absolutely wonderful. So that's a great kudos for our staff and the whole grazing land management course, that it's getting recognition from other areas within Australia. So that's the first tab. The next tab is the actual question. So this is where people actually start assessing what they're doing. You'll notice that there's 3 standards, and that's below industry standard, and above industry standard. And like I mentioned before, only the individual can see what they put in those standards. Like, I can't go in and say, oh, Mari Vitali said she was below standard for this, how embarrassing. All we get is a anonymous dump of the percentage of people that have answered each standard, which was that graph that I showed in the actual slideshow. So, for example, if we're looking at the first one of understanding land capability, and if I went in and said I was below standard, you'll notice that over on the right, in the goals, the industry standard goal has automatically been ticked. And you'll also notice that over to the far right, there's a red bit of writing, and that's the actual action plan. So what it's done is it's decided, well, you've indicated that you're below, I've indicated that I'm below industry standard, and the computer has, well, the program's decided, well, you're going to have to do something to try and get to industry standard. And that's the action plan. So I'll just give an example of how the action plans work. To get them to work, you just click on them, and it'll generate a Word document. It'll talk about the area that you assess yourself on, that's the understanding land capability. It'll talk about the standard that you've assessed yourself on, saying that I don't consider my the land types and their capabilities in my grazing land management or property management development. And it'll talk about the goal that you want to achieve. So you're going to have to try. I'm going to have to try and get to this standard. So I have to come up with actions on how to do that. And this could be something simple as attend and ag. Oops, sorry about my spelling. Force mapping workshop. Use map to determine grazing management options. Now that's just something I've completely made up, but you get the idea. Now within the actual workshop itself, we try and provide assistance to people if they want assistance on the actual action plans. It's great that we've got the 2 soil guys involved, because the soil stuff, people have been asking us questions, and we're able to get more expertise through their help. So yeah, the whole point though of these action plans is that A, they have to be practical, and B, people are going to have to want to use them. So we're not all about reinventing the wheel, and we're not trying to tell people what they should do. We're trying to give them a hand to increase their productivity and sustainability into the future, and that may be through an action plan. The last step of the action plan is to put in the date that they want to get that action completed by, and that could be any date that they want to achieve. It could be in 6 years, 2 years, 6 months, next week. It's completely up to them. The last step in that process is to insert the action plan. And you'll notice that we have gone onto the Key Actions for Review tab, and the action plan has turned green. It's no longer red, it's turned green. Highly riveting stuff. And also, it tells you on the actual tab over here on the right the key actions that have been generated for that module. So as I went through the key areas and created action plans, it would summarize them all over here and on this page. And also, people have the ability to download these action plans into Excel and print them off. So yeah, they can do that at home. That's there's one more thing that I want to show you that's just been put into the actual website, and I know Mari is very excited about this, so I better talk about that, otherwise she'll be disappointed. Dan Hickey has developed this gauge that indicates where you sit compared to other people that have answered the module. It's not on a workshop basis because, I mean, if there was only 3 people at a workshop, it would, you'd have a pretty good idea of where people sat, and you wouldn't want to embarrass people. So it's actually a summary of all the data that's gone in within a particular time period, and it gauges where you are compared to what other people have done. Obviously, I haven't answered many, and that's why the gauge hasn't moved, but you get the idea of what the gauge can do. So that's something that's just been put into it, and I think it's pretty excited. And I know that Mari's very excited, so I'm glad I thought about doing that, not to disappoint you, Mari. Anyway, that is how the website works in a nutshell. Greg, we're open to questions now.
Okay. Alrighty, we do have a couple here for you, Matt. The first one is, how can you give us some comments on how to capture producers that are not all that computer literate, and in regards to making access to log in as simplistic as possible for those who want it to be that way?
Yep. Yeah, that's a really good point, and we are coming up with a process. Currently, the actual process of registration is being controlled by the actual administrators of the website, which is Dan Hickey, myself, Joe Ginjami, and 2 FBA staff. But in saying that, only Dan has access to do what he does with reporting. So we're going to come up with a process to make it easier for people to register online if they want to do this by themselves. And we've started that process where an email comes to Joe and I, and we then get in contact with these people and do it for them, and then tell them when they can get online. So that's what we're currently doing. And the other process is that we're doing it through the actual workshop scenario where people do have problems with the website. There's someone there to give them a hand.
Good. Okay. Wonderful. Another one was, mate, will there continue to be feedback sheets after each BMP workshop?
Yes, there certainly will. It's the only way that we can improve what we're doing. So yeah, we've got this really good system now, so we're keen to use it to the best of our advantage.
Okay. Alrighty. So I'm unsure. Mari, do you have another question for Matt? You're on mute.
Thank you, Greg and Matt. Just a follow-on comment from the query that came in about for producers that aren't computer literate. We have discussed the idea also of, I suppose you could say, interactive PDFs of the modules. So yeah, these modules for people that don't want to use a computer could fill out a PDF or, of their questions. The only problem is then if they're not on the computers, they would then have to entrust someone to upload and submit that into the system. But that could be facilitated or as I say, the QDAF or some of the people presenting this information have the trust of producers that it's still confidential. So I agree that we do need to kind of just capture some system for people that don't want to do computers at all. But it is a web-based system predominantly, but there is ways around that with PDFs or interactive PDFs if need be.
Yeah. Well, currently the PDFs are available too, Mari, that if we go into a location where there is no internet access, that we're able to do these PDFs and send them off to Dan, and he uploads them for us. So yeah, we do have that. We do actually have that ability. But the biggest concern with that is that for the whole partnership is is capturing the hectares. So that's the biggest concern.
Good. Okay. Thanks, mate. Another question for you is or can you or one of the project partners, are you able to describe the next 18 months' work on the BMP project using the Queensland Government and other funding?
Yeah, so over the next 18 months we will be continuing into the Fitzroy Basin, trialling extensively with the actual animal modules and the people and business, and we will also be piloting within the Burdekin Basin as well, looking at how what people think of the program and whether they think it's relevant, and to try and help people out as much as possible. So yes, we will be, that's over the next 18 months, we'll be continuing to focus on the Fitzroy, but also going to the Burdekin as well.
Okay. Alrighty. Krista, away you go.
John, it's probably more a comment than a question, but I think one of the really exciting things about this collaborative project with the various partners is that the Grazing BMP, apart from giving us some really important industry data that we just haven't, or industry hasn't had to date, is that it's going to be a really important tool to signpost producers to a range of training options that might meet those action plans that they develop. So some of those activities, could be DAF workshops. Some of them could be, one-on-one work with consultancies. Some might be some work through ag colleges. I mean, it's such a broad area. And I guess another exciting opportunity that's currently coming up is there is a new project that's just starting that Jane Pryor and a number of our team are involved in around reviewing extension messages around a number of key areas that obviously dovetails very well into the Grazing BMP. So in the couple of years ahead, so moving in parallel but working with alongside this project, there'll be also updated extension materials that can be used by a range of providers, from DAF staff to NRM group staff to private industry, etc., with an assurance that they will be high quality integrated materials that have the latest research, that they'll be tailored to different learning styles, so really ensuring that we're supporting that face-to-face and one-on work, but also complementing that with people who like to look at information that might be online, or they might want to view a video, and I think all of this work will really start coming together very nicely.
Mari, do you have another question for Matt?
Matt's presented, I suppose, the producer interface. In behind the Grazing BMP, and Matt alluded to it, is the, I suppose, the aggregated reporting tool, which I think Matt called a dump of information, but it's an aggregated scoring of where people are at. So we and I suppose the industry has a password to get into the back end of this Grazing BMP site, where we see the aggregated information, the percentage of producers for each of the key actions, where they're achieving, how many are below BMP, at BMP or above, and also can do some of those hectare maps, and there's a whole kind of reporting tool at the back, which is, as you say, the exciting stuff for the aggregated information, which at the moment is password protected. Only those individuals or organisations with that password can access that. So that's the other side of it, which is important. That's all. Thanks. And I suppose the other thing is just following on, yes, Queensland Government is quite behind progressing the Grazing BMP. The Australian Government provided the seeding money initially to kind of get it up and running in the Fitzroy, and now I suppose Queensland Government are quite behind that. And there is negotiations that possibly, if there is if the Queensland Government, the Minister Powell, gets, I suppose, enough trust and assurance that producers are behind this and industry can demonstrate the reporting capabilities of Grazing BMP, there is the potential that regulations like the Environmental Risk Management Plan requirement in the Burdekin could be receded in the future. But it depends on, I suppose, enough people demonstrating that, yes, they will get on board this voluntarily, and that yeah, industry can report on and demonstrate that terrific environmental stewardship and animal stewardship that is occurring, but be able to quantify it. Over. That's it from me.
Okay. Thanks, Mari. Matt, I'm very conscious of time here. Is there any last-minute information you want to pass on to everyone at all?
Thanks, Greg. I guess the last point that I would like to make is that, and everyone's, like Mari's talked about it and Krista has talked about it as well, but this is just a great tool that producers can use to promote what they're doing. It's been designed to help them out as much as possible. There's been a lot of negativity talked about Grazing BMP that we've linked to the Sustainable Round Beef Table, which is not true at all. And it gives DAF a great way to focus our extension activities into the future to help people out. That's about it for me, Greg.
Okay, thanks, mate. To everyone out there, if you have any last-minute questions, by all means, you can ask them before we wrap everything up. Matt, there's one there. Is what's going to be the role for other NRM groups to roll out the BMP?
We will be working with other NRM groups in other areas to look at delivery methods for the modules definitely into the future. So currently we're working with FBA obviously because they're our main partner, but there will also be scope for working with Burdekin Dry Tropics when we go to the Burdekin.
Yep. All right. Okay, so I don't see any more questions there. So Matt, look, I'd like to thank you for a wonderful presentation. I think you've given a great overview of the Grazing BMP, and I'm sure that everyone who's attended this morning on the webinar will be able to take something away and be able to put what you've shown there to some good use. So to everyone there, I'd also like to thank you for all coming along to Matt's presentation and interacting with us. So that's all for today, and until we meet again, all the best, and it's goodbye for now.
Yeah, until we meet again.